So this is just this is the cohesive, hopefully cohesive version of a previous video I've recorded. I'm trying to keep it under 10 minutes or so, after figuring out all of that for about 50 minutes. So I have here the tweaked version of a Sulpont Legato and the original version. I'm just gonna play the original version first. I can't really hear any legato at all, so let's hear my version. Here's the original again. So, yeah. And I'm now just going to show what's different here compared to the original version. So the first thing is the sample start time. So we have to go into the expert mode here. So that's in this area here where you also have the libraries tab. So instead of libraries, we have to select expert. And I'm not an expert in the slightest sense at all. I'm just a few things I know about tweaking. So, and then we see a set of groups, and that can be very confusing. Sometimes it's more or less confusing. It just depends on how the developer has named their groups. In that case, it's about decent. So intervals means the legato intervals, so the transitions from one pitch to another, and then the sus is the sustains with the different microphones: microphone 1, microphone 2, 3, 4, and so on. And important is that we always have all of the microphones loaded. So all of the microphones have to be active. Otherwise, sometimes there's an issue with things getting broken when it accidentally when tweaking samples from a mic position that aren't loaded. So and we also can't change the sampler mode here if the microphones aren't active. So everything has to be active. In that case, it's pretty unintuitive because it's the microphone is loaded if it says load, if it's gray, but if it's red and still says load, then it's not loaded basically. So it has to be gray to be loaded. That's all we can tell. So now the first thing I've done here is tweaking the interval start time. So I have to select all of the intervals. Sometimes there's a problem with Kontakt not setting the also important, you have to set the edit flag for the selected groups. That's how it works. So all of the groups selected, and then set edit flag for the selected groups. And when doing that, sometimes I get a problem with the first or the last group not having the edit flag, so it doesn't have that white box here. So I then just have to select everything again, and again set edit flags for selected groups, and generally it works then. So I'm not sure why that's a thing, maybe a bug or so, I don't know. So the first thing I've done here in my tweaked version, oops, the first thing I've done in my tweaked version is setting back the sample start time. So basically, some people maybe have heard about it as the pixel poet trick, which is basically just changing the start time of the intervals. So we generally have them start earlier, so they have more time to breathe, and there's more of the more of the starting pitch basically in the sustains. So they don't start as abruptly and as immediately as they often come shipped in the library. And let's just hear the intervals in isolation. It's very useful to hit group solo sometimes, because here's the button for group solo. That way we can hear only the intervals without the sustains. That way it also kind of becomes apparent what intervals and transitions actually are. So let's just hear them. If you don't know how legato works, that's probably already very informative, right? So you just by hearing the intervals in isolation, so that's the full library. And those are the intervals only. So what happens here is that we just have a sample playing while we overlap a note, and that sample is a recording of a transition to the next pitch. In that case, we have a transition from the first note, so it's silent if I press a note, because we don't have a sustain. We're not really transitioning to a next note, so there's no reason for an interval to play. Only if we play the next note, there's actually an interval playing to that next note. Da da. And that's basically legato. And then that interval is fading out, and the sustain is kicking in right after the interval is fading out. Da da. And then the sustain is coming in. Ah. That's how it works without isolating the legatos. And here we're isolating them. And that's how the sustains sound without the intervals. So it's missing the bridge between the target note, the starting note, and the target note. We're only hearing the sustains. Now with the intervals, the gap is closed, and we're hearing the bridge from the one note to the other. That's basically legato. And if there can be issues, a lot of issues with legato scripting or legato, how legato is set up in the instruments, is with the start time of the intervals. So a lot of times the intervals, the bridge, is starting too close to the target note. Just like here. If we now listen to the intervals in the original instrument here below, I'm just going to rename them actually. So this one is the original, and above is so I'm just keeping the name here. So that's the original. And if we isolate the intervals here, compared to my version above, check out the original again. So in the original, we have a very, very, very harsh attack of these bridges, of these intervals. It's very, very abrupt, and we almost can't hear the originating pitch. We almost can only hear the target pitch. We can't really hear the bridge too well. We're not really hearing the but more just the rather than we just get the target pitch almost rather than a smooth bridging. That generally has to do with the starting time of the intervals. So that's basically the pixel point trick. The way the pixel point trick works is that you would change the playback mode to sampler. Because if we don't set the playback mode to sampler, then some things just don't work the way they should. For instance, the way I am doing it, which is not quite the pixel point trick, the way I'm doing it would just take very, 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 very long for whatever reason. It just takes the engine very long to do that. So it's important to set it to sampler. And the pixel point trick just somehow also only works in sampler mode. So for both approaches, we need the sampler mode. So that's the pixel point trick. I'm just doing it here now. You would now, after having chosen sampler for the intervals, you would add a constant via add modulator, external sources, and constant. And I like to keep it on pitch just to see if it works at all. Right. Now I'm gonna invert it, and we can hear the pitch changing. So yeah, the constant is working the way it should. We can hear it also against the sustains. Yeah, the intervals are in a different pitch, so the constant itself is working. It's just a kind of insurance. Now we go to the sample start, and we can hear it sounds very, very different. Let's set it all the way back. That's how it sounds by default. Now let's increase the value here. Important to note again, it has to be on invert. No super drastic change. Let's set it back even further. And now we're hearing the desired legato effect. Rather than just compared to, right? That's an actual bridge. That's an actual transition. So that's what we're doing with the pixel point trick. So we can do that, but sometimes that doesn't work the way it should for whatever reason. And in that case, we have a second option of selecting all of the groups here. Very, very important here that selected groups only is active. So we need that orange button here. We need that button here to be orange and say selected groups only, because otherwise we also going to affect the sustains and everything else and the releases and so on. And we only want to affect the legato intervals for now. And I'm dragging over it very carefully. I have to start outside of these events so that we're not accidentally moving around a event. So I'm clicking somewhere inside the editor where there's no event and drag over. I click with the mouse and hold and keep it held and drag over these events so they're all selected. But you could also just click inside the editor and just click STRG and A. Basically, you could just use whatever key command on your system is being used to select everything. Basically, the same command you would use to select multiple things in the Explorer. You would just use to select all of the events here. So that way you don't have to click around in the editor. At least you have to make sure that that you click inside of contact first, because otherwise it's gonna apply that to Cubase, right? Or to your DAW or wherever you are. And then it's gonna select everything in your DAW, not inside of contact. So we have to first click inside of contact itself, somewhere, just somewhere safe, till that works. So select all. And the alternative way is using this green line here, the sample, the S, that's the sample start. That green line here is the sample start, and drag it further behind. I sometimes just set it back way too far, just to hear whether it has any effect. And then we have to click on this little wheel and go to all selected zones and select copy current sample start settings, because I want the sample start setting to be further back for all of the zones. So I want all of the intervals to have a later sample start time than they currently have. So I'm just I'm dragging it back and copy that sample start setting from that wave editor here to all of the zones that I've selected. And as we can hear, that has the same effect as that pixel point constant trick. And we can affect that value by setting it back, because now it's way too far back. I've got to set it back a bit further again. And then we have to click copy current sample start settings again. Yeah, and if we're just fine tuning things, and I think it has to be a little bit back again, then I have to set it back again just a little bit. Oops! Don't double click it, otherwise it's gonna go back all the way. Now I have to find the right point again. Let's see where the right point is. But yeah, that sounds about right as a starting point. So that works too. So that would be the alternative way of setting back the sample start time for the legato intervals. But that's only the beginning. So that's generally where the pixel point trick is ending. And if we now listen to the affected original, I mean, it's definitely better than before, but it doesn't really sound. Oops! I have to turn off group solo. So. It's still not really that smooth compared to my final version. So there's a lot more that goes into it from that point onwards, because from that point onwards there's also a difference in the ADSR, in the volume envelope here. So what I do generally is I bypass the envelope of the developer. So I'm just gonna replicate my tweaked version in the original here. So here we can see, in this case we have the ADSR from the developer, which I'm going to bypass now, and I'm adding my own ADSR. It's very important that we are in the amplifier section, so you can read it here, amplifier, not in the source menu. I make that mistake quite a lot, that I select add modulator, external resource, envelopes, ADSR, that I do that in the source module. We have to do it in the amplifier module, which unfortunately looks almost exactly the same. So it's really easy to make that mistake. So add modulator in the amplifier section, envelopes ADSR, and I'm just adding my own because I bypass the developer ADSR and just add my own, because sometimes that ADSR is somehow being affected by the script that they've made. So if I change a value, it might just somehow snap back to its original value without me noticing when reloading the patch. So I just to be sure, I load my own ADSR, and I replicate the fade-in time from my tweaked version. That always takes a lot of fiddling. I fiddled around with that a lot till I arrived at the value I arrived at. So let's see how it looks like in my tweaked version. It's kind of just a, yeah. Let's replicate that. Kind of like that, and release about 800 milliseconds. So it's not that important to be exact about it, but yeah. And then I've also increased the volume of these intervals. Here I'm turning on group solo again. I generally increase the volume of groups by inserting some effect that has a volume knob on it. So I'm just gonna insert a effect, an inverter, and because we inserted in the group insert effects menu, it's only going to apply that effect to the groups that we have selected. So I'm just gonna increase the volume on that inverter button. Let's see. Now it's too loud. Let's just stick with 2 dB. Okay, so, and another thing I've done here is the intervals are panned differently from the sustains. So I actually can't hear it that well anymore, but the intervals sound, I think, a little bit more. They're a little bit more on the right side, a little bit more to the right than the sustains. The sustains are a bit harder panned to the left than the intervals. At least I could hear it very well in the original when I first tweaked it, but currently I can't hear it anymore that well. It probably depends on the dynamic layers, so I'm just gonna play around with it a bit more. I think the sustains are wandering a little bit more to the left, so I'm just gonna add a stereo modulator to the intervals that we've selected and pan it a little bit more to the left, just so it's a bit more cohesive. That's one of the most important things with Legato, that the intervals sound are in cohesion with the sustains, of course, because I mean they're the bridge between the target notes. So I mean that's the thing. If the bridge is too short, if the bridge between two ends is too short, then it's not gonna work. Or if it's if it just doesn't fit between two ends, then it's not going to work. So that's just kind of the most important thing with legato. And in that case, the sampling is just pretty poor, so it will never really be a great legato. But I'm just improving it as far as I can do as a non-contact person and non-samplist. The panning issue just really depends on which key range I'm playing. Sometimes I'm hearing it, other times I'm not hearing it, so I don't know if I'm going to actually do that. So maybe just very, very subtle. I don't know. It's just, it's really random. It's a thing with some notes, but not others, so that's the problem. I would have to kind of tweak every sample individually, but I'm not really going to do that now, so... let's see. So I think the intervals have to be even louder. Here, let's go to the inverter plugin again and increase the volume. And I think I also have to tweak the sustains. So let me select the sustains, and I bypass the envelopes by the developer and add my own. Set the attack to a decent value, so it's kind of smooth. It's not really smooth at all, but since we're just focusing on the legato transitions, I'm just gonna ignore that for now. Let's see how that works with the legato. In the case of this library, actually there's it's the script that they've written that actually determines the attack and release time. So I can't really affect it too well with the ADSR. Like we can hear when we're playing legato transitions. It doesn't really matter how I set the volume envelope. Actually, it should sound super abrupt now, but it still sounds smoothish. Or if I increase the release time, yeah, it should ring out really long, but it only rings out long if I release the note completely. So if I don't play any legato intervals and transitions, only then is it going to use the volume envelope here that I've dialed in. Everything else is being handled by the script. So I would tweak that, but I can't because they've done it in the script, and I can't edit the script due to lack of knowledge, and they've locked it on top. So yeah, I can't do anything there. So I can only do a little bit to the extent that the script will allow me. So let's look at the very unnatural start of these sustains. It kind of sounds like a machine gun when it's starting. So what we can do about that is set the sampler mode to set it to sampler again, but this time for the sustains. So we have the sustains all selected and turn them into sampler. So, and now I'm basically gonna apply that pixel poet type trick to the sustains. So I'm selecting all of the sustains and add the constant. It's working. Great. So now I'm gonna set it to sample start instead. And let's hear the difference between these. That's the original attack, now with the pixel poet trick. Now it's nice and smooth, maybe a bit too long, so we can set it back. Let's see what's a good value here. Kind of around here, it's good. But now we have a much more natural attack because the sustain is now playing further back, so it's closer to the point where they actually recorded the string players starting to play the instrument rather than cutting straight into the sustains when they've already long began playing. So if the sample is starting earlier, we actually get the point where they are starting to play. So we get the natural sound of string players starting to play, basically. And we can have it all the way back, so we get the full sound of them starting to play. Or we can set it back a bit more, so it's a bit more immediate. But still more natural than the default, like that. So we can kind of dial in how long we want that natural string player start attack. Around here it seems good. Let's bring back in the legato. But because the attack of the sustains is now fairly long, sometimes if we play a legato right afterwards, the legato will be very loud. Like that. Because the sustain itself is now starting much more slowly and smoothly, so the legato that comes afterwards can be very like that one. So in that case we can counter that volume bump with a motion of the mod wheel or CC1 data. If you just watch the mod wheel motion here, you can look at it here. So I'm starting with the mod wheel fairly at the top, and then I move it down when the legato is coming in, so it's quieter and smoother. Compared to when we're not doing it. And yeah, that's not just moving the mod wheel down for everything, but only moving it down when the legato is coming in. So that starting sustain is basically being played with the mod wheel at the top, and then only when the legato of the next note is coming in, we're moving it down. Rather than that. So that would be the way to get around this difference if we move back if we select the longer sample start for the sustains. So, but that's only relevant for the very first note without any intervals. So all intervals that are all connected notes, all legato notes after the initial first sustain won't be affected, won't have that problem, right? It's only about the very first note or when you don't play legato within a passage. So in that case, the legato is still pretty annoying. So let's see if it's better in my version. I think the sample start time of the intervals is a bit too long here, so I'm just gonna set it back a bit more. And too quiet, so I'm gonna increase the volume again. And that kind of setting back the sample start and then setting it a bit further back and then further into the sample again. Or, just that's kind of the biggest part of all that. Just tweaking all of these values till it sounds right. That's kind of the volume, the ADSR, the sample start, and so on. That's kind of the fine tuning and fiddling. It's kind of the biggest part of making the sound decent. So I just kind of generally just keep doing that for quite a while till it sounds good enough to to put into my templates. I mean, at least it's definitely better, much better than the original. So let's just load the actual original after I've replicated my tweaks here. Let's go to where is it? Over here. So that's the actual original. I mean, the legato is of course too loud. after I've made it louder. So in that case, the original is actually my tweaked version, and the one with the title below is the original actually. So it's vice versa. So yeah, it definitely sounds much smoother and like actual legato. So one thing to keep in mind here is when changing things to sampler mode, then there will be a greater amount of RAM being used. So as we can see, the original is using only 400 megabyte roughly, and the the actual my tweaked version, which is called original, tweaked version is using 1.4 gigabyte. So if we're done tweaking, we might be able to set it back to DFD again. But I think if you're using the pixel poet trick with the constant here, I think in that case it's not going to work. I think if you set the sampler mode to DFD, then it's actually going to erase the effect of this constant here. But because I've done it my own way, with setting the sample, that green sample start slider here back, I didn't really use the pixel poet trick for this one. I can basically just delete that, and I think there shouldn't be any problems with setting it back to DFD. Let's see. Let's see. Now I'm changing it to DFD. Still sounds the same. So yeah. Okay. So with my own way, there is no problem with setting it back to DFD. So we get more RAM. Let's set back the sustains to DFD too. We could have also just done it all together, but now I've done it separately. And actually the constant, in that case, I have used the pixel poet trick, and it's still working after setting it to DFD. Like we still get that effect, right? Let me just disable that track. Sometimes there's some problems with reloading an instrument, so it's good testing how it sounds like after reloading the instrument. So I'm just gonna enable it and see if everything still sounds the way it should. Everything working. Let's see. Pixel poet trick still working. Yep, it's still working after setting it to DFD. I think I've had it not working sometimes. Maybe it depends on the instrument, but you definitely have to check. You definitely have to check these things. Setting it back to DFD and seeing if everything still sounds the way it should. Disabling the track or reloading the instrument manually, and seeing if it still sounds the way it should after it's loading. It's reloaded. So yeah, in that case, should be done. Tweaking is complete, and we have our RAM back. So now the tweaked version and the original have a very similar amount of RAM. It's a little bit different, no idea why, but doesn't really matter, I think. So that would be it.